In America, the government is not empowered to command under criminal or civil penalties religious worshipers when and how they should worship. Indeed, this sacred right to worship pre-existed government and therefore supersedes any dictates such government may issue. Why then the mind-boggling discrimination against both citizens and the church by state and local governments in so many places across our country? Hello, my name is Steve Stiger with Good Life 45. Welcome to part 2 of A Threat on the Church. We're calling Attack on Your Freedoms. You're going to learn things today you probably haven't heard covered in the news media. A lot has happened in the past 4 weeks since our first program, and while you're not hearing a lot about church persecution in the news media, the fact is that it's increased sharply, and so have the number of cases. I'm here with Matt Staver, who along with his wife Anita founded Liberty Counsel in 1989 as a ministry to defend religious liberties, constitutional rights, and advance pro-life and pro-family issues. Our first program, A Threat to the Church, helped people better understand how the U.S. Constitution protects our rights and those of our families, especially in this chilling, confusing time of government overreach by so many at the state and local levels towards individuals, businesses, and especially churches. It's been 4 weeks, and we want to update you on what's going on in America. The fact is that the government is not empowered to levy criminal or civil penalties to worshipers or dictate how and when they should worship. Yet we see government discrimination against citizens, businesses, and churches rising at an alarming rate. This showdown is a fight between our Constitution and state and local officials who believe that their authority allows them to simply dismiss your constitutional rights. Friends, Matt and I would like this program to be a resource for you and your family. So please grab a pen and paper because we're going to give you some excellent information. Matt, welcome.
Thank you.
It's such a blessing to be here.
It's good to be with you.
So we left off with churches a few weeks ago, right? So let's start there today. Catch us up. Help our viewers understand what's changed. How many states are involved? What are the biggest issues? Who are the biggest offenders?
Well, things are changing on a regular basis, and some states, since we last talked, actually loosened up some of the restrictions, and Texas is one that actually has loosened up, and a number of other states have loosened up the restrictions as well. They haven't removed all the restrictions. Now, Florida did that some time ago, and Florida's leading the country in that respect, but other states are different kinds of restrictions. So some are just allowing churches to be able to meet. Others are imposing a number on those churches. And then those that are allowing some churches, they're trying to micromanage what's happening within the church service. So for example, one state said that if you have a choir, they can't sing. Or if you actually sing or have instruments, you can't have any wind instruments. You can only have percussion or stringed instruments. And some states have said, well, you shouldn't have communion, even if you have it in closed containers. And then some really try to micromanage all that. Some of them are recommendations, some of those are requirements. But the worst states in the country right now include California, but it's just recently started to loosen its restrictions, yes, saying that you can have 25 people or 100, whichever is less, and that is irrespective of whether you have a 50 or 5,000 seat sanctuary. The worst state in the country, however, is probably Illinois, and that's where we're litigating on behalf of some Romanian churches. I mean, they're not only limiting the size to 10, no matter what your size, but for the Romanian churches, they're doing all kinds of things, such as blocking off 9 blocks of parking and towing the neighbors' cars, even though the church doesn't use the street parking. They tried to get the neighborhood against the church, which didn't work. And they then tried to give the pastors disorderly conduct charges for having a peaceful service. Then they issued a letter that said that they would engage in summary abatement, which means that they would even go to the extent of tearing down the churches if they continued to meet. So that is probably the worst state in the country, but there's others that are fairly close behind.
Thank you. Let's talk about 2 events that to me capture what we're facing, and especially in Illinois. In April, it took the United States Department of Justice Attorney General Bill Barr. It took him writing to state and local governments to respect First Amendment rights of religious freedom. Right, that was in April, and he cautioned that the Constitution is not suspended in times of crisis.
And that's why we're litigating on behalf of these churches, because the governor of Illinois said liquor stores, abortion centers, they're all essential. You can have however many people you want, no social distancing. They don't have the sanitizing requirements, and abortion clinics are notoriously unclean anyway, very unsanitary. You can have the big box centers, the super centers, Lowe's, Home Depot, all those big stores, lots of people in the parking lot, as well as inside. But only churches, 10 people. And you're never going to get beyond up to 50 or above, or 50 even, until 12 to 18 months, he said. And that's only when they have tracing and tracking and testing and this vaccine that Chicago mayor says she will vaccinate everyone in the city of Chicago. So that's not a voluntary vaccine. That's mandatory. So they're saying that's 12 to 18 months down the road. So churches, you just have to wait on the sideline. And if you decide to meet with even 11 people, doesn't matter how big your sanctuary is, what you do to protect them, social distancing, sanitizing, doesn't matter. That is disorderly conduct for you as a pastor. That is a public nuisance for the church. And we will do everything in our power, and that includes demolishing the building. That's tyranny. I mean, if that's not the example of tyranny, nothing is. You would think that that would only happen in a place like communist China, where you've seen churches bulldozed, or in the former communist Romania. But that is being threatened in the United States of America. And it's like we have to apologize to these pastors. This is not America. This is not the America we want. And this is not the America that any of us want to live in or want our children to grow up in. We are the land of the free, and the only way we're going to keep it that way is if we continue to fight for our freedom and recognize the threats to it.
So the freedom to practice one's faith is a defining feature of American liberty, right? And really the promise of America. So why then are so many churches being actively discriminated by state and local governments?
You know, you go back to the founding of America, to the Mayflower and all of the founders, and why did they come here? They came here because of religious freedom. Why did they come here for that? Because the church and the state had ultimately joined together in the countries that they fled from, and the state was persecuting the church, or the church was being persecuted in some other way, and they wanted to flee to have a bastion for religious freedom. They came here, and that's what this was all about. That's why we have the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, government hands off the churches, hands off our free exercise of religion. But there is a bigger agenda here, and the church, just like in any communist repressive regimes, whether it was the former Soviet Union, communist Romania, communist China, wherever you may go, when communism has that agenda of ultimate state control, the one thing that stands in its way is the church and the Christian believers, because of the inherent understanding that we have of the freedom in Christ. We want to have that freedom in the community in which we live. That always pushes back against tyranny. And that is why the church has always been the target in these repressive regimes. And so you have to ask yourself the question, what is the end goal here? And why is the church being persecuted like this? The church is being persecuted because it stands in the way of the end goal. What is that? That is the ultimate control of individual freedom. That is the tracing and the tracking and the mandatory vaccinations and monitoring every aspect of your personal life on your social media, and then forcing you to be in compliance with various government restrictions, not only with the COVID-19, but into the future as well. It's literally a control, and the church stands in the way of that, and that's why it is being targeted.
Let's shift over to social tracking or tracing. A lot of that has been advanced much of it against this backdrop of COVID-19, right?
Yeah.
But I think your work and your cases indicate, as you spoke, that it really has very little to do with COVID-19, and there really is a
Right.
different agenda, right? I mean,
There is
can
a
you-
different agenda. I mean, you look, for example, at the deaths of COVID-19, and what we now know nationwide is that 43% of those who died, almost half, of COVID-19 were in nursing homes. Nursing homes. Almost half of the deaths were in nursing homes. We have very much mistreated what is going on in these nursing homes, particularly in New York. If you look at Minnesota, 81% of the deaths in the entire state occurred in nursing homes, or what we would call long-term care facilities, nursing homes or assisted living. So when you look at the numbers, they don't match up to this massive shutdown across the country of 330 million people. So what really is now being talked about is in order to return to what they would call the new normal, and their new normal is a different normal than what we are used to, that you'll have to have tracing. Now, you'll have to have testing, and you'll also have to have isolation and quarantine, and you'll have to have a mandatory vaccine. The problem with that is this is not your ancient tracing and testing. This is not somebody comes in with a communicable disease and they ask you who have you been in contact with. This is tracking every single movement you make, requiring you to have an entry electronic badge, whether it's a mandatory app on your phone or some other mechanism, to be able to even have access to fly on an airplane, to eat at a restaurant, to go into a public place, to even leave your home. Let me just give you an example. In India, India has a mandatory, well, it's an app. They call it voluntary, but it's really not voluntary. If you want to leave your house in India, you must have this app on your phone. And you're not able to fly unless you have the app. You're not able to go to a restaurant, to a grocery store, to shop. The only way you can survive in India without this app that traces literally every movement and every person that you come in contact with, and is your entry or your objection to going into a place. Yeah. It gives you the key or it keeps you out, is to have this app. So it's not voluntary. And what this is doing is literally having government create a database on you, monitor every single communication and contact. And here's what would happen. Somebody who has this app, and they've gone to a theater or they've gone to a restaurant, and somebody in that restaurant has had presumptive positive tests for COVID-19. And we're just talking about COVID, because this goes way beyond COVID.
Sure.
But let's just think about COVID. Somebody in the same restaurant, and they've matched it up. So you've gone to this restaurant, somebody that sits maybe a long distance from you in the restaurant, presumptive positive for COVID-19. Now you get a notice, and then all the people that you've had contact with at your church, at your office, this is what they're teaching them right now for these trackers and tracers. That all those people that you've come in contact with, this electronic grid that shows all the different communications, all those individuals would have to go into a 14-day quarantine. And if you go into that, you can go into it again and again and again and again. And the only way to get out of that cycle is to accept the mandatory vaccine. And we're just talking about COVID-19, because there's always a new vaccine coming out. So this vaccination is going to be a continual process, constantly. Like you had SARS, you had MERS, you had H1N1, you have COVID-19, you have all these others. You have these constant mandatory vaccinations with constant adverse reactions globally, with a constant stream of hundreds of thousands of people globally dying from these vaccines. This is a real problem not only to our freedom, but is a real problem because it really is a social Darwinianist model to weed out certain segments of the human population. And as the church, as Christians, we believe every person is made in the image of God and everyone has intrinsic value, and the church stands in the way of that ultimate objective.
Let's talk more about this, especially how we can protect God's kids and push back. In our country, constitutionally, how can, I mean, it's really no business of the government, how people spend their time. I mean, there are parameters. You can't speed. You can't. I mean, there are laws and things like that. But beyond that, so how do we push back against these overreaches that are taking place against these agendas?
Well, we have to push back with our elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
Elections matter. They really do matter. Now, if some people say, well, but this is a red versus blue state, it's not. Every state in the country, all 50 states, are actually engaging in this tracing and testing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have to push back on all the states. There's some states that are worse. Illinois is one of the worst, but all 50 states are involved, red and blue. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a real problem that we're facing on a massive scale. And it's not just in the United States, because if you want to travel internationally, you'll have to encounter these kinds of situations. So missionaries are taking trips internationally. The other international countries are engaging in this as well. So what we're talking about is a very aggressive, very extensive global agenda that we have to push back on. Elections, first of all, matter. The second thing that matters is we need to communicate to our elected officials now, those that are in office at every level, and push back on this, because this is a very serious problem with invading our personal privacy, controlling our freedom, and the government having more control and having the state be the end all. And that's really an ultimate objective, the state being the ultimate arbitrator and the controller of individual people, thinking it knows best, as opposed to we know best for our families and for ourselves.
Exactly.
So we have to push back. We have to first become educated, then we have to become active, we have to communicate, and we have to elect people and make sure that when they get into office, they understand this is the United States of America, and we're not going to let it just simply dissipate on our watch.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very good. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the churches. Talk for a minute about, you mentioned California, where it really took, again, the U.S. Department of Justice issuing, directives and guidance there for some of those changes to occur, right? There are also things happening in Kentucky. Can you spend a minute?
Sure. Also in Kentucky, for example, on Easter Sunday, we represent the Marysville Baptist Church in Kentucky, just outside of Louisville. And on Easter Sunday, the governor sent police officers to the church for the parking lot service. These are people that were still in their cars. They didn't get out of the cars. And the officers went car to car. And they took down the license plates and the VIN numbers, and they gave them notices of quarantine. And they then sent letters to each one of those people a couple of days later, saying that you need to quarantine for 14 days. And these are people who had no exposure to COVID-19. Their only exposure was they were sitting in a parking lot of a church.
Exactly.
They could have gone to the parking lot of other stores or the liquor stores, wherever it might be. They could have turned on the Christian radio.
Been completely fine.
No problem. But because they were in a church parking lot, the governor targeted them. And they were told to take their temperature at a certain time every day. And they had to report that every day. And they couldn't travel out of the county without giving the government's permission. So we ended up filing a federal lawsuit. The governor bragged that he was going to win that case. And fortunately for the governor, and unfortunately for our freedom, he lost twice, big time. We won 3-0 federal court of appeals decisions. The first one on a Saturday afternoon, 3-0, in our favor for the parking lot service. And the following Saturday afternoon, the same panel, 3-0, working through the weekend, issued another order in favor of the in-person, and all those restrictions then got removed. So that was something that we had to litigate there in Kentucky, but we've done that, and we've been doing litigation across the country and other places, working literally with thousands of pastors now across this country. And
nearly every state.
In every,
right?
yeah, every state.
Is it every state? Okay.
It's probably every state. It's not. If it's not, it's most of all the states. But we've had representatives from all over the country. It has been an amazing situation. You know, the churches and pastors, when we first got into this, nobody really understood COVID-19, and you got a lot of misinformation, wrong information, information that was designed to scare, some information that was promoted by the media because they wanted you to view their material. And so the churches just voluntarily closed down. Most of them did, almost all of them did, in-person services for 2 weeks, because that's what they were told. It's only 2 weeks, no problem, just 2 weeks. Well, they can go online for 2 weeks. Some of them obviously can't go online, like a church we represent in Virginia has no online capability, and some of the members have no online capability. So that's not an option for every church. But they did, and so then it got extended, and it got extended, and it got extended, and the pastors began, many of them, saying enough is enough. And they began to see what was happening. And it's not just the churches are not meeting. And this is, I think, something very important. It's not that just that the churches are not meeting. Let me give you an example of why it's important, just one of many, for the churches to be operating. Not only in addition to the biblical commands of not forsaking the assembly of yourself together, praying, laying on of hands, anointing, baptisms, the Lord's Supper, all these other things that you can't do online. But a church in New York had very strict restrictions, and the pastor just contacted us and said, you know, enough is enough. I'm going to start. And so he started opening the church service. On the first day he opened the service, yes. A man saw that the church was open. He was headed in a direction to commit suicide, to end his life, because he had been so depressed, locked in, you know, the economy, jobs gone, all the information that you constantly feed yourself with in the social media, the news, lots of anxiety, lots of depression happening, and he was about to end his life. And he pulled into this church, not a member of this church, pulled in, church is open. He ended up getting a chance to speak with the pastor, and that was a life-changing decision. Had that church just been doing online, the lights would have been off, nobody in the parking lot, that man would have gone on and may likely have ended his life. That was his intent. But because that church was open, his life was saved by the fact that these people were there, and the pastor said enough. And you can repeat that over and over and over again. And unfortunately, there are so many people that didn't have that opportunity. There are so many people all over this country. I mean, I deal with them a lot. Just a couple of days ago, I've had several people just call, and this is repeating over and over again. A person, an elderly person, a 91-year-old mother and grandmother, has an illness, gets admitted to a hospital, not COVID related, but what do? Until you get the COVID test, what do? What's the protocol? They put this 91-year-old grandmother, who already has predisposed health conditions but is not COVID positive, into the COVID section of the hospital. And when the family says, why did you do that? We didn't know. They say, this is protocol. They have to go into the COVID section. You put somebody who's 91 years old into a COVID section of the hospital who does not test positive. They said the only way you can get out of it is we have to do the test, and when the test comes back, then we can move you out. But we can't treat you until you get the test. In the meantime, you're in the COVID area of where people have tested positive and are being treated for COVID. And when the family wants to come in and visit, they're told no, that no one can come and visit. I can tell you, Steve, this is happening over and over and over again. I can also tell you that some people have died because they didn't get the medical treatment that they went in for. I can tell you in this one particular situation, the woman was put into the COVID center, the COVID section. When the test finally did come back, she had severe headaches, wasn't COVID related. The tests were negative. On the way from the COVID place to the place in the hospital to get the treatment, she passed. And she was there all alone. Now, that has happened all over the country. And if people just open their eyes to see, look beyond the little world that we're in, to what's happening just in our nation, let alone the world, it's even worse around the world.
Yes.
And realize the impact of what's happened by these shutdowns. And mark my word, already has happened. More people have already died and will die from the restrictions and the lockdowns than they will from COVID. Disease. By far. It'll dwarf the COVID deaths. That's not an exaggeration. And it's happening all over the country. And my heart aches for this family who wasn't able to be there because their mother and grandmother died alone.
Mm-hmm.
And had she been able to go right into the treatment she needed, she would be living today.
Mm-hmm.
And that story is
Playing out.
repeatable all
Yeah.
over this country.
Let's go back to your earlier point about worldview and this lack of shared truths and how we arm people who are watching this program to protect their rights, their families' rights, because this is really an epic battle that's playing out. And so talk for a minute as we close about where we go from here as individuals, how we can be prepared. I know we can pray, we can fast, right? I mean, but there are other things. I mean, elections matter. Speak to that. Speak to those.
Well, the first thing is you need to read the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
The scriptures really have been a blessing passed down through thousands of years. People have given their lives for it. We have all kinds of versions on our smartphones, and we don't pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
Get into the Word and
Mm-hmm.
stay in the Word on a daily basis and read the Word and study the Word. Read it fast, read it slow, read certain sections, do studies on them. Read the Word. That will begin to give you a Christian worldview. But it's more than just reading. You need to be in relationship with the Lord and really seek the Lord, press into the Lord through prayer, through listening to good Christian music, through associating yourself with other good Christian people that will hold you accountable and pray for you. So you can ask for, and God will give you that spiritual wisdom and insight. So you see what's coming. You see beyond the clutter of what's taking place. You see beyond the surface to see what's behind that. And the only way to do that is to have knowledge, not only in the scriptures, but also spiritual knowledge as well. And that comes in relationship with the Lord. And this is a test. I think many have failed this particular test, but it's going to be a bigger test down the road. So we need to take lessons from what we have experienced through this COVID-19 situation and be prepared for even greater tests that are coming down the road. Certainly, we need to not only be in the Word and in relationship with the Lord on a regular daily basis. Just like, you're eating, you can't just go without sustenance. You've got to be able to feed on the Word and with our Lord. But then you have to be involved and engaged. We're not islands. God put us here to make a difference, to transform our lives and for us to transform the culture around us, to not be conformed to the world, but to transform the world. And so that takes us out of our little cocoon to really move into every sphere of our life to help others to be educated, to comfort them, and to be involved.
Friends, here are 2 websites where you can gain info on the Constitution so that you and your family can learn more and better protect your freedoms. Matt, thank you again for listening and having the courage to make yourself available to God's call on your life. How He works through you and your great team is breathtaking and reassuring to each of us. Friends, I pray you will come alongside this great ministry to empower Liberty Counsel to do the great, great work they do every day to protect each of us and our families. Thank you.
Another original production from Good Life 45, where hope happens.